Welcome to In Conversation. I'm your host, Steve Iverson. Today we're speaking with Rick Beyer, a local historian, author, filmmaker, teacher, who was a long-time Lexington resident until he recently moved to Salem. We're going to talk to Rick about his recent projects, which include a book and a film about something called the Ghost Army, and also a book called Rivals Unto Death about Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. So thank you for coming on, Rick.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So maybe we could start by just hearing a little bit about your background. What have you done up until the book and the movie in your past, and what kind of things do you have experience with?
Okay, I mean, we're going to run out of time if I go over the
We'll just hit the high points.
Okay, fine. So I started my career as a journalist. I was a radio reporter and a TV news producer, and I worked in advertising for a while. And eventually, about 20 years ago, I found my calling, which was making history films and writing history books. And I've been doing that for about 20 years. It's either my third or fourth career, depending on how you keep track of it. And it started with work I did for the History Channel that actually came out of the advertising business. And so I made a bunch of documentaries for the History Channel, National Geographic, and other folks. And then I have to do the math, about 13 years ago, I came across the story of the Ghost Army, and that is how that particular project got started. So, I have, and I'm still working on it, oddly enough, even though it's already led to a documentary and a book. It's the project that won't go away.
It's a big one.
It is. And it's an amazing story, a World War II story about deception and art and all sorts of interesting stuff.
Well, what was the Ghost Army?
So the Ghost Army is a nickname for a unit that was called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, which is a terrific piece of deception all by itself because it's a boring name for a really fascinating unit.
It sounds like a euphemism.
Yeah, so it sounds like somebody who's going to be filing papers someplace. And what they actually were a deception unit. So their mission was to impersonate other much larger American units to fool the Germans about where those units really were. And to do this kind of deception, they used inflatable tanks and trucks and airplanes and all sorts of different vehicles to fool them on a visual level. They used sonic deception, they used radio deception, and they even did physical impersonations. So the guys would wear the shoulder patches of the unit that they were impersonating and go into the local cafe in France or Luxembourg or whatever and talk loose. They sometimes impersonated major generals. So they would have somebody from the Ghost Army who's really a major, but now he's wearing the 2 stars of a major general and riding around in a jeep with guys with machine guns and stuff to fool enemy spies who'd been left behind. So, and they did this not once and not twice, but 21 different times between June 14th, 1944 and in March of 1945.
So it was more towards the end of the war.
Well, it's, you think about the war in Europe, in Northern Europe, it starts with D-Day, June 6, 1944, and they go into action 8 days after that. So they are there for all of that fighting in Northern Europe, but they're not involved in Italy or in the Northern African campaigns.
Okay. So they go near the front lines?
So
set up shop?
One of the interesting things about this unit is that they operate often quite near the front lines. Many people are familiar with the so-called D-Day deception, Operation Fortitude, which happens back in England to fool the Germans about where D-Day will take place. But these guys are right on the battlefield, so sometimes they're a quarter of a mile from the front line, sometimes they're 2 or 3 miles, 5 miles. And they are trying to fool the Germans to make them think that that the 75th infantry division is over here when the real 75th Infantry Division is over here. So they'll all want to come here to face you, and then I can go and kind of make my attack that way. And so that means that they are in danger. They are drawing fire. They are taking casualties. And so it's a story that's both, it's inspiring, it's funny sometimes, it's like, wow, really, this really happened, and it's tinged with sadness as well, because this is a unit in a war that's doing something deadly serious, and some people are dying to get it done.
Well, yeah, and if they're being fired upon, do they return fire? Do they have the capability to defend themselves?
They did not have any heavy weapons. So the heaviest
Yeah.
weapon they had would have been a 50 cal machine gun.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they are being shelled by enemy artillery, which is the most frequent type of fire that they came across, they are not returning that fire. They are, ducking into the trenches and trying to avoid it. But you think about it, their mission in a certain way is to draw fire.
Yeah.
That's part of the job description. Shoot at me, don't shoot at him. Shoot at us over here. So that you won't see the people over there. So
who really can defend themselves.
Yeah. But who might be moving or doing something else.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, a very early deception they did, in fact, it was the very first one, and a very small scale one, is simply that there are two artillery batteries in Normandy. And the idea is they want to draw the German fire away from the real artillery batteries, so they set up fake artillery batteries, with fake cannons, rubber cannons, all camouflaged and everything. And they would use flash canisters so that they could synchronize their cannons and make a flash sound at the same time that the real cannons go off, which are a mile or so away. Oh. So hopefully the idea is that you divide the German fire. They don't really know what's real, what's not, so that they would be firing at both. And they did, in fact, draw a lot of fire away. And then they did much larger deceptions that had the same principle.
I understand that some of the people involved were sort of creative types who worked in the arts and so on, because their skills were especially useful for this. Is that correct?
So right, the Army, to carry out the visual deception, in which they're using all sorts of different inflatables, the Army recruited artists. And what they actually did is they took a camouflage battalion that had already been created, and they brought them into this unit to handle the visual deception. And the camouflage battalion had a lot of young artists in it, including some who went on to become famous. Bill Blass, the fashion designer, Ellsworth Kelly, the very famous minimalist painter and sculptor, Art Kane, the photographer, Arthur Singer, the wildlife artist, and other people who were terrifically talented but lesser known. And they are now part of this deception unit. And in their spare time, they are painting and sketching their way across the battlefield, across the war. This is not part of their mission. It's like if I was there, I'd be keeping a journal. Well, they're painting and sketching. And so these paintings and sketches and drawings that they did are really an amazing view of World War II. And we made them a part of the book and a part of the documentary, and also I'm actively working now to make sure that they are preserved, because they present I think a unique vision of the war. What it looked like, because they're not painting dramatic battle scenes. They're painting orphan children or bombed out churches, or they're painting each other. They're painting the towns that they went through. And some of it is very, very moving. Many of these paintings have stories attached to them that are really, really quite moving. So that's an important part of the story as well.
I see. And I imagine at the time what they were doing must have required some of the latest technology. Especially I'm thinking about sound recording and projecting.
The sonic deception is some of the most interesting deception, because what they did is they recorded the sounds of any sounds that an infantry division or an armored division might make in traveling and getting set up. Not battle sounds. You're not going to fool people into thinking there's a battle.
Transport sounds.
Transporting sounds, bridge building, assembly. They recorded these onto 16-inch glass transcription discs, which were the same things that people used to cut records.
Okay.
And then they brought this huge collection of sound effects now that they have recorded. They brought over to Europe, and then for any particular deception that they're doing, they can take the sounds that they need and mix it together to make a show. I mean, just like you would make a TV show by editing different shots together. They're editing different sounds together to make a kind of an audio show.
And doing that live?
Well, they're not doing it live. They're taking that and recording it onto a wire. Oh. So a wire is the predecessor of the tape recorder. Now we have to deal with our current day audience, so we have
they
to.
might not know what a tape
before
recorder is.
Before the iPod, right? We had the cassette recorder. Before the cassette recorder was the audio tape recorder, and before that is the wire recorder. It records on spools of wire. It's about the thickness of fishing wire. And 2 miles of wire holds about 30 seconds of sound. So just for example, this 6-foot length that I'm trying to make with my hands would be about 1 second of sound. And so they record on that, and then they play that from their sound trucks. And they're playing it from sound trucks that have 500-pound speakers. And they have a range of about 15 miles.
15 miles?
Yeah, it's incredible.
That's really loud.
Yeah.
As is the sound of war. It's just loud.
Right. Well, I mean, you think about it. You can hear things sometimes a long ways away, and you to be realistic, you want it to appear like it. You don't want it to appear like it's next door if you know that it's not coming from next door. So you want stuff to be able to be a long ways away, and they could use this by staggering where the trucks were. And staggering the timing of the sounds, you can make the sound feel like it's coming closer, like it's moving by, and so it was apparently very realistic. One of the guys in the unit, Dick Syracuse, was an officer in the sonic unit, and he's out with them one night, and they're doing deception using this audio equipment, using the recorded sounds, and apparently it's so realistic that another Army officer not affiliated with the ghost story comes out and starts shouting at them that they shouldn't have any tanks in this area. There's not supposed to be tanks in this area. Well, he was the guy who didn't get the message, but it was that realistic. And these are the speakers you can see on the screen. Yeah, they weigh about 500 pounds. And so this is you're seeing some of the recording here. They actually had the recording studio inside a truck, and they've got a microphone set up that's recording all these tanks. They did that down at Fort Knox, actually, in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and then brought that to Europe. So pretty amazing. Yeah, great technology. I mean, that's one of the things that's, I think, if you work on something, I've been working on this for 13 years now, between the movie and the book and other projects emanating from it that we're trying to do. And for something to be interesting that long, it's got to have a lot of things that make it interesting. And this has deception and illusion and art and technology, kind of all intersecting in a war zone. And that is a really striking thing.
And courage. I mean, they're out there in
right.
battle.
I think it's a special kind of courage, and every one of these guys would deny it. They would say, "Oh, no, we didn't do anything. It's the frontline soldiers and the guys who are really fighting and taking the heavy casualties, and what we did was really easy compared with that." But it's to put yourself in danger and not be able to defend yourself, not really have that power. But to still be out there and carry out the mission, knowing at any time that the enemy could figure out what you're doing and then crash through and cause you all sorts of problems and kill you or whatever, I think is a very courageous thing, and I've always been struck by that, and it isn't maybe as immediately apparent as the courage of somebody who is the frontline soldier. And there's no question that they weren't in the same kind of danger as those folks. But I do think that you can't underrate the courage it took them to pull off all these missions so close to the front.
I agree. Well, we need to take a brief break, and we'll be right back to speak more with Rick Beyer.
Okay.
Hey.
Hey.
Is everything all right?
Yeah, of course.
You were never a good liar.
I mean, he's finally locked up. We saved the day. I'm fine.
Sure. Just tell me what's going on.
I don't know.
You don't know what?
I don't know what to do next. Everything's different now.
Yeah, that doesn't mean you have to be.
But I am. So are you. I just wish. Have you been filming vertically the entire time? Dude, this is a movie, okay? This is cinema. It's not your sister's piano recital.
Oh.
Turn the thing sideways.
Oh.
What are you doing?
Oh. Sorry.
Welcome back. It's In Conversation. We're speaking with Rick Beyer about his research and book and film about the Ghost Army in World War II. So, are many of these guys still around? Who did
So
this?
there were 1,100 men in the unit. There are probably about 20 or so who are still alive today.
Oh.
It's not very many left. Yeah. So it's one of the things we have been active in doing is starting a nonprofit to preserve and honor the legacy of the unit. It's called the Ghost Army Legacy Project, and because I don't want all these collections of photos and stuff to all kind of spread to the winds, and I also want to make sure that these guys aren't forgotten when they're all gone. So we are lobbying Congress to try to get a Congressional Gold Medal awarded to the unit. We are building an archive that we hope to donate to the Library of Congress.
Where is that?
Right now, it's in the closet of my apartment, taking up a lot of room, I might add. But it's got letters and photos and stuff that's been donated to us, and that we want to preserve. And we're in discussions with the Library of Congress about donating it to them. So we'll see how that goes. And we have other initiatives as well. There's a lot of students who do history projects on the Ghost Army every year that we try to help support, because we want the memory of it to go on. So that's in addition to the book, of course, and the documentary film. And then the other initiative, Steve, there's always one more, is that there are efforts in Hollywood to make a movie out of this.
Oh, right.
They optioned the book, The Ghost Army of World War II, that I wrote with Elizabeth Sales, Andrew Lazar, who's the producer of the movie American Sniper, working on this. There's a script, I haven't read it. No one's offered me the opportunity. And, they're trying to develop it in that mysterious Hollywood way that nobody really knows how that works until suddenly a movie emerges at some point. Or doesn't.
Did I read that Bradley Cooper is
Bradley
associated
Cooper
with
is
this?
involved in this. He is in the jargon. He is attached to the project. No one even knows what that means.
That's probably the reason they use that word.
Yeah, and he's on it as a producer, but that doesn't. I think the idea is that they'd love him to do the lead role, but I don't think that there's anything. I mean, I think that's one of the things they're trying to work out. And as I say, it's all a black hole. It's like buying a lottery ticket. Maybe you'll win, maybe you won't.
Sure.
So it's just like buying a lottery ticket, then you don't find out for a few years whether you win or don't. So
Well, some absolutely wonderful movies sort of just kicked around for 20 years before they got made, I think. I'm no expert.
oh, many. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was a great example of that. When I think it was almost 20 years, and it was originally Kirk Douglas wanted to bring it out, and eventually I think it's his son who produces it because Kirk Douglas has gotten too old. He wanted to play Randall McMurphy, who's played by Jack Nicholson. And very famously, George Lucas wanted to make a movie about the Tuskegee Airmen for years and years and years. And George Lucas could not get money to make this film, and eventually self-funded it. And and then and you hear those stories. Then there's all the stories you don't hear is about all the movies that never get made.
Right. And if they don't get made, you don't hear about them, unless you're an historian of film.
Of failure.
Of failure.
I prefer not to be
failure.
a historian of failure. I want to be a historian of success.
I think you're on the right track.
All right.
The other project of yours that I hope to mention today and talk about a bit, hear more about, was the book Rivals Unto Death that you wrote about the rivalry between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. When was that book published?
So that book came out about a year ago, and it's kind of an interesting story.
Oh, it is.
Well, I mean, both the story of Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr is fascinating,
Right.
but the story of how the book came about is interesting.
I see.
You might have heard that there's this musical. Yeah, I don't know if that you got that.
I've
You've
heard of it.
You've heard.
I've heard
okay,
of it.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
I think Mike Pence attended.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So somewheres in the hoopla, the amazing surge of interest in this musical, the editor who'd been the editor of my first book series called me up, and he said, "We are interested in having someone write a book about." A short book about Hamilton and Burr to take advantage of all this interest. Would you be interested in doing that? And, I don't know how much you know about the book business, but usually it's the writer who's begging the publisher to publish them. So when the publisher calls you and says they'd like you to do it, yes is a very good answer.
That's
to
the
that.
response.
So, but the thing is that I only had 4 months basically to write the book because they really wanted it in a hurry. And so I was already quite familiar with the story. I had actually researched a documentary on this some years ago that didn't get produced. But I did a few weeks of preliminary research, and I was getting started to get writing, and I realized that I basically had 10 weeks to actually write the book.
Wow.
And so
you would have had to have researched it previously for some other reason because you couldn't write it that quickly.
it'd be
otherwise.
hard. I made a decision to have it be 10 chapters. And then I put myself on a really strict writing schedule every week of doing a chapter a week and grinding out a chapter a week for 10 weeks. And that involved, even if you've done the research, you still have to go back and look and pull the quotes and do stuff. So that would involve, the first couple of days each week was doing the sort of the final research call and then trying to write it and then give myself a rewrite day, and then I would take Sunday off and start again on Monday on the next chapter. And that was the summer of 2016 for 10 weeks in a row. And my wife, Marilyn, proofread and was sort of the preliminary editor for each chapter, suggesting revisions and doing stuff. And then there was some revision time after that, but it was a very quick process. But the great thing about that is that it really made me focus on just what's the good stuff. What's really important here? I'm not going to be able to get into everything. The book is 200 pages long. It's a relatively short book. I'm not going to be able to get into everything. So we're really going to focus on the good stuff. And I think it comes through. I really feel, and I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on it, that people really feel like they get out of that what they kind of want to know.
I think a lot of history books are too long. You know, they're this thick, and you really have to have a dedication to the topic to stick with it.
Well, now that is an interesting point of view. It depends, it depends on how interesting the topic is, I guess.
Yeah.
Because a lot of history books feel too short to me.
Oh, do
like,
they?
Not the big 900-page ones, but there's often times when I'm reading something that's the length of what I just wrote that I would kind of wish for more. But then I am a complete history nerd, right? I am completely. It's my whole life really it revolves around history. So naturally, I would feel that way, and I really. Know, however, that there's a lot of people who don't. And a lot of the books that I've written, I think are I describe them as gateway books. It's like the marijuana of the book world, right? But it's something that gets you interested in the topic and wanting to know more, and then you can dig in and try to find out more. And I always feel like in my writing, I always say history is too important to leave to historians. It's too interesting to leave to historians. So, and I'm not knocking, professional historians, but I always try to find the most compelling things and make people get excited about it. That's my passion and my goal in life.
Well, this book certainly draws the reader in and is a very engaging book. So it looks like it's working.
One hopes, and I don't want to give away the ending of it, but it is, it also does. One of the main characters dies before the end of the book, so it is kind of a little tragic thing there.
Yeah. Well, what is the rest of the book about? We have that.
It's about their rivalry. So the interesting thing with Burr and Hamilton is that they knew each other really well for 30 years. Mm-hmm. They really come across each other in the Revolution, where they're both officers. They both serve at different times as aides to George Washington. They are lawyers together in New York City. They rise in politics in different political points of view, but they're rising at the same time. Their families know each other. They know each other's wives. And so you have this sort of long rivalry that becomes, and that gets wrapped up in the political issues of the day and becomes, sort of very hostile and not uniformly. It's not like they were always hostile. Like sometimes they were really against each other, and then sometimes it seemed like they were very close to becoming allies, and then they split apart again. And so my idea was to try to really trace that rivalry and follow it through and look at that in the context of the greater issues and stuff going on. And there's so many fascinating things, fascinating things that didn't get into the musical, like the Whiskey Rebellion or the Alien and Sedition Acts, or the time that Burr fought a duel with Hamilton's brother-in-law, or the time that Burr saved Hamilton's life, or the other time that Burr saved Hamilton's life. So there's a real richness to this story that goes far beyond, bang, bang, somebody's dead in a duel. And I try to bring that forward.
So both accomplished, well-connected, passionate men.
Orphans, too. Both orphans. Both war heroes. You're pretty interesting guys. And I think Burr, I tried to be objective. Burr is often cast as the hero, as the villain in the story.
Yeah.
And fair enough. But I tried to be objective and not sort of view him that way throughout and see him for what he is, which is an ambitious politician, but also somebody who's an abolitionist, a feminist, a supporter of immigrant rights, far more so than immigrant Alexander Hamilton, a brilliant political innovator, a good family man, a patron of the arts. So I tried to bring some of that out as well. Mm-hmm. And I try to, we have a tendency when we look at this period of time, we see a bunch of guys in wigs.
Right.
And it's very formal, dignified, and solemn. And they're the founding fathers, for God's sake. They created America.
Right.
And they're a very passionate, fractious, jealous, ambitious bunch. And there's a lot of shouting and swearing that goes on, and making obscene remarks about each other. And I try to bring that out in the book as well, so that you realize that these guys are human, flesh and blood, just like us.
At that time, though, that kind of conflict, that kind of friction, can lead to a challenge of a duel, which is a little less common now, I think.
Less
How
common
common
now.
was it then?
Well, it was. It happened with fair frequency. It did not happen all the time. There were a lot of people then who were against dueling. It was illegal then, but it was a pretty noticeable subcurrent of American history, and it was especially prevalent among people who had been military officers. It sort of follows out of this sort of code of honor of the military. And it continued to be fairly prevalent until about the 1850s. So, you could get in a lot more trouble by saying something publicly about somebody or accusing them. There were sort of trigger words, if you accuse somebody of being a scoundrel or other words, they almost have to challenge you to a duel, or their honor is at stake, and their honor is threatened, and, you can't have that.
And now it might just lead to a snarky tweet in response.
Well, yeah, it's interesting that in a way the threat of the possibility that there might be a duel may have kept them more in line, because maybe you're more careful about what you say when you realize your life might be on the line every time you say things. But then they also did a lot of anonymous publishing, which is if you think about the internet today, Twitter and other parts of the internet where people write rants and screeds that are anonymous, and the founding fathers often published stuff anonymously. In which case, then even if everybody knows that you wrote it, but it's written under a pseudonym, then you don't have to face up to it in the same way. So. I'm always amazed at how history basically shows us that things are never as different now as we think they are. So much is not exactly the same, but human beings do the same kinds of things, and you can follow those patterns in history and see the relevance of it today. And I think when you do that, it also helps you to view them more as people, and not to view them as cardboard cutout characters, or white guys in wigs, or whatever. That it might be tempting to look at them as.
Yeah, human nature is fairly constant, I think, even over long periods of time. The really essential things. So the trappings might change, but people are people.
Well, and they thought, we think sometimes we act like the country's going to fall apart tomorrow, and they all thought it was going to fall apart tomorrow, or there was a good chance of it. And of course, at their time, the country's very new, so there is that possibility that it might not work, that it might only last 25 years, and then something else happens. So, in a way, the stakes are even higher for them than they are for us now, when we at least think that America is going to keep going because we've done it for 250 years. So we think it's going to keep happening. They didn't have that surety that might happen. It made all of the debates, I think, that much more sharper edged.
So it was really a more difficult. We like to think at the moment, or some people like to think, that we're living in the most challenging time in the country's history. We've never been more divided. It sounds like that was easily beat. What we're going
I
through
think
now.
they were way more divided, and we think, well, but they weren't screaming at each other the way they are now. Well, sure they were. The newspapers said that some newspapers said that if Thomas Jefferson became president, that murder, prostitution would flourish. There'd be blood in the streets. That women would be sold into slavery. Women in New England buried their Bibles because they thought Jefferson was going to confiscate and burn them. So believe me, They believe me. You know, we sometimes think history, it's a happier, simpler time. It was a very harsh, argumentative time. And even though these guys are heroes and we carved them into rock and put them in paintings, they were flesh and blood just like we are.
Fascinating stuff. I'm afraid we're out of time.
Of course.
I've enjoyed talking, and thanks so much for coming in.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate it.
You bet. Take care. Thanks for watching. It's been In Conversation.